What is going on, guys? And today we are back and we are doing another segment of Bloody Noses here with my good friend, Chris Vitch. Chris, good to see you. Thanks for joining me for this one.
Kyle, hey, good to see you. Happy to be here. It seems like there's been a lot of action online.
Yeah, it seems a lot very nostalgic of the old days when you can watch some of the very high stake games, and even some of the same players are still playing. So that's kind of cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I'm back from the World Series, kind of just getting back into the groove here. So I'm happy to see you and see some online mixed games going and get back into the content game a little bit here too.
yeah, you had some pretty decent runs. So congrats on those. I know you didn't
Yeah,
take one home, but you had some
yeah,
shots there. So
can't complain. I had a good summer.
yeah, cool. All right, so
What do you got for me?
I got like three hands for you here. So let's start let's doing some sharing here. I got three wonderful videos for us today. I have
All right.
a first one here. This is going to be a stud eight hand. So the action here is going to be between George Alexander, Victor, and Jared Blesnick. So this first one here is going to be between Jared and Victor, but this was kind of like to me a very nonchalant hand at the start of it. But
Okay.
I wanted to discuss something afterwards because obviously these guys they have a little experience against them. I don't know how much they have playing this high stakes at this point. I think Victor's actually just starting to learn some of the mixed games as well. But obviously this first hand here, stud eight. Victor brings it in with a 5. Jared completes with a 6, and Victor calls. And kind of a I would say brickish 4th Street here. Not too much going on. It goes bet by Victor, call by Jared. And on 5th Street here, Jared's going to bet the open sixes when he catches the 6 of clubs. And then Victor kind of catches a brickish card with a jack of clubs, and he's going to call. And
Okay.
then Jared bets on 6th Street here where he catches a 4, and then Victor raises. Now, Jared's bet here to me is a little bit interesting because the obviously Victor's board here, he makes 3 to a low. So against, a lot of times in study or better, one of the main decisions points I would say is when your opponent catches 3 to a low. Because when your opponent catches 3 to a low, now a lot of times like they have the ability to make a low and basically be free rolling a non-low hand. Now in Jared's position here, he has, obviously 6-4, so he still has the ability to make a low, but he elects to bet into Victor here. So I think this is kind of, just interesting from the perspective of like, Victor catches a third low card and Jared decides to still bet. And
Sure.
Victor does raise and Jared does call. And on the river here, it goes very quickly. Check, check. And Jared shows up with 3 6s and a 7. And Victor here shows up with 2 8s and an 8 low draw, no flush draw, no straight draw. And it looks like Victor here was trying to freeze Jared from putting in another bet at this point. And the one thing I was kind of surprised about is like, if your opponent is ever doing this here, does Jared have a hand? Because I think if Jared's betting on 6th Street, his most likely combo here is the 6-6-6-7, meaning he had
Yeah.
two sixes with a 7 because he's blocking Victor's straight draws. But if you ever see your opponent start to do something like this, do you ever start to consider yourself like, maybe I should start 3-betting like this specific combo when I'm blocking all of his straight draws?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot going on in this hand for sure. I feel like we could kind of go back a little bit street by street before, like, well, you're asking kind of a question about 6th Street and the river in a way, but I think that there's a lot to consider in this hand.
Sure, let's go back.
Um, well, the first thing I'll say is that like it is a pretty wide range spot, despite the fact that it's only three-handed, so there's only 3 antes. But typically, when you have low card versus low card with only one high card behind, Jared can absolutely open here, a little bit on the light side.
Mhm.
He catches a good card for some of his steals that are going to be some like weak 3 flushes or hands like 6, 7, 8. Um, but obviously, Victor catches by far the better card on 4th Street, so it's kind of an automatic check and bet at this point. I should also say that I think Victor will definitely have some defends here that are not necessarily like, premiums, right? I mean, both of
Absolutely.
these guys are like loose, aggressive players, and in a wide range spot, it's pretty tempting to defend, fairly loose. So, Victor's betting his board, but doesn't necessarily have to have 4 to a low or a good hand here. I think the first piece of relevant information is Jared continuing on 4th. Like he kind of has something, right? Like this would be a spot where if you're just on a steal and you get called by the bring in, and then they catch a suited low card, if you have the weakest part of your range, you're probably just done with the hand.
Mhm.
So I think that's the starting point, is that Jared is kind of claiming something here. And for that reason, when he calls and then on fifth street he makes open sixes and Victor catches a brick, then I think it becomes a pretty automatic bet from Jared since he doesn't really ever have anything weak. I mean, sixes are also just usually the best hand, and then it becomes Victor who's giving away a little bit of information because now he's continuing
Mhm.
in a relatively small pod here. So I do think again he would be folding the bottom of his range here, like now facing the big bet on Fifth Street. So the ranges are starting to get into like decent hand territory, like
Mhm.
relatively quickly here after bet call on fifth here. I'm a little surprised now, knowing Victor's hand, like being results oriented, like we're pretty confident that he has split eights in this spot from the way you ran through the hand, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I don't think he's just raising naked eights with no low draw at this point. It doesn't really make too much sense if that was the case. Like if
I
you,
think that there's a good argument for him to raise split eights on Fifth Street, though.
okay, yeah.
I mean, he's like I said, he's giving away information continuing anyway. He has the best hand a decent amount of the time, and he has a lot of equity. Um, so I'm a little surprised that he didn't find a raise there on Fifth Street with the eights. But I mean, these guys have a lot of um shorthanded metagame going on as well, and it's a bit of a judgment call. I think both options make sense. You asked about Jared leading into the low board here. I think that if knowing that he has 6, 6, 6, 7, which is most his likely hand, although I think he could probably play any split sixes here on third street, so he could have the jack kicker here. But I mean, three sixes here seems like a really good hand to be betting with into this board.
Yeah, right.
Obviously, you don't love it if your opponent has a low and free rolls you, but you have all the cards that he needs to make a straight. So it's
Mhm.
just pretty hard to get scooped, even if your opponent has a very premium low draw here. Even worst case scenario, Victor has 2, 3 in the hole.
Yeah, and I'm not questioning his lead here at all. I think his lead is good, especially with the combo that he has.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mine is more with his specific combo. If your opponent's going to throw in some, I would say some lighter raises. Like here, if Victor somehow makes like two pair, or if somehow he delayed with the eights and like makes eights and fours or something along those lines and now decides to raise,
Yeah.
I look at Jared's hand and Jared almost has like what I consider to be close to the perfect combo to three bet in this situation because he's blocking the straights, right? And even in a situation where he might be up against like some low draw where uh, you know, Victor didn't two bet on third, which I think removes some of like his strongest low combos, right? Like ace deuce three,
Ace
ace
wheel
deuce
wheel.
five,
Yeah.
ace wheel kind of combos, stuff like that. Low suited combos for the most part, I think are removed as well. So in situations like that, I think to myself is like, I mean, what's the worst that happens here? I put in the three bet with like up against deuce seven, maybe deuce, I mean, deuce six is hard because you have three sixes in your hand, but something like deuce seven sometimes where, he might have one out or something along those lines. But if he's going to throw in some light raises with high hands too, like
Yeah.
I think Jared's combo here is a good one to consider three betting.
On the other hand, Jared may view it kind of the same way that I was, which is that he might feel that something like split eights is just supposed to raise fifth. So, what is Victor really representing when he raises now? He's basically saying he has a low. And if he has a low and Jared has three sixes, then he's still free rolled, right? He has no chance to scoop the pot and he has no fold equity. So, it is a bit of a judgment call, but I would just be thinking, at this point, Jared kind of feels like Victor's range is just heavily weighted towards lows and, there's no more value to be had.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Also, I wanted to mention something too, like just generally when we're talking about poker, I think a lot of times what happens is, every single time you see a specific street or a specific action given by a player, like ranges start to narrow every single time you see an action, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a concept that a lot of players don't necessarily like take into account because a lot of times, like even when I'm in the background doing maybe like using pro poker tools, every single action I have to change the range based on like something that's given. If like someone continues here, like a good example, this is Jared. If Jared continues on 4th Street, he doesn't have his range anymore. What his opening range look like, steal range, because he has to fold some of those combos. So, going forward, just people listening in general, like every time you see an action, like ranges tend to narrow really, really fast, pretty quick, especially if you see like bet raises in front of you. So, um,
And this is happening for good players at kind of an intuitive level, right? I mean, I think that's something that's worth pointing out. Like here, you and I are doing this analysis. We can kind of spend as much time as we want talking about the hands. But the reality is that when you're playing, you're doing this process kind of all of the time, like estimating what sort of hands your opponent is supposed to have. And whoever's good at estimating those situations accurately is the one who's going to end up making the best decisions and win money. One thing I didn't ask you, I'm curious, like, how do you think, how do you feel about Victor raising 6th Street here with like eights and a low draw?
initially when I saw it, I I'm not a huge fan of it. If I do something like that, a lot of the simulations I kind of ran in this situation to kind of look at the equities. some of the hands that I gave Victor here was like maybe um maybe like an ace plus at random, like maybe ace seven or something like that. No, not sorry, not ace seven, like a pair, so like ace eight maybe. That I don't even know if Victor has a lot of the combos of like three low cards without an ace here. Um, I would if you make that type of raise, I want to make sure that I have some sort of backup. Now Victor does have a backup with the low draw in this spot. He's unblocking the sixes, which I guess that kind of hurts us a little bit. Obviously, the four does help him a little bit because now it's unlikely he makes sixes and fours. So eights here are probably still going to be the best hand, I would say, a decent bit. But I don't know if Jared is checking like naked sixes here. So usually he's going to have either some combo of like straight draw, low draw, flush draw with the sixes. Like,
Yeah.
like he's
The
not going to
eights
have
with a low draw should be the favorite against that.
the eights with the low draw should be a favorite against that, as you were saying.
I
Yeah.
think so.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Yeah. So, like at first glance, I was kind of surprised to see Victor's hand,
Yeah.
but kind of thinking about it in general, I think like the other thing too is like they're playing shorthanded really big. So,
Yeah.
when we discuss a lot of these hands in a lot of these situations, there is so much metagame that we don't understand that's even like going on.
For sure.
We can talk about a lot of the GTO theory, but I mean,
It's also just the difference in like the average aggression level between like a small stakes game and a big game, right? Like all those hands that you mentioned that Jared could bet, I think he will bet. I think he might even bet some random hands too, like just random flush draws or um I guess not just like ace king, so sort of like bluffy combos, but like point is that I think he is going to bet here pretty thin. And I think in your average small stakes game, people are going to be a little bit more thinking like kind of the way you first analyzed the spot, where you're sort of like, well, the low card came in for Victor, so now you have to check to the low board. And I do think that is how like small stakes players play this spot. So obviously, if they're checking that spot more, then the bet here is much stronger. But my thinking for is that Victor's raise is kind of good. He kind of didn't raise on fifth when he absolutely could have, so he may feel sort of subconsciously that he's just sort of underplayed his hand.
Mhm.
And then solvers kind of like this idea of like a free showdown raise like we used to in the old school days, where you have a hand plus something,
Yeah.
and like his hand can clearly bet when he makes the low on the river or improves to a good two pair,
Mhm.
or really any two pair maybe. So I think it kind of just fits. Like it all kind of makes sense that his hand is good enough to put in one more bet with, and like maybe he wants to do it here and then bet the river if he improves.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think it was an interesting one, and then obviously like the river to me was I think more of the just the interesting spot because and I also think Jared should have just probably taken a second. Like this game in general, it seemed like players are playing relatively quick, even though they're playing for very, very high stakes. It seems like they're just playing very, very fast. And I would have probably in Jared's situation, like knowing if Victor's gonna try to take a free showdown race here, I mean, I think his hand is I still think even after discussing it and saying like, if Victor has some sort of equity here with like one pair and maybe some other sort of draw, three sixes here becomes a slam dunk against that range in my mind for a three bet. So,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
so I definitely would have liked that. That's another thing too. If anyone's studying out there, like and you start to think like, oh, I should be making some of these thin bets. Well, if your opponent starts making some thin bets, like when you start to have the top of your range, like that just becomes an easy slam dunk re-raise in a lot of these spots too. So
Yeah, I mean, otherwise you're not punishing them at all, and they're kind of just doing a good thing, right?
yeah, we'll actually get into a stud hand later where it's kind of the same thing.
Oh, stud is hard.
Stud is hard for sure. So, anyways, but yeah, interesting first hand here, and all right,
Definitely.
let's go to Omaha hand. I got another Omaha hand.
Victor's a little lucky he didn't make two pair on the end. He would have lost another bet at least.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, he definitely would have bet any eights up. There's no question too.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get into this Omaha hand here. This is the greatest game ever. We also have Jungle Man. He decided to jump in here too. So
The
Jared,
table's almost filled up at this point.
yeah, just a nice little 2K 4K game for you. Jared opens George flats button again. Like one of the things that we can talk about too is specifically, when George decides to flat here, a lot of times, like think about like range construction, right? Like he doesn't have the premiums in his hand. He kind of has like this. I would say more along the lines of like maybe some high hands and maybe some like low rundown kind of things. That tends to be, I would say, in Omaha.
Yeah.
What you see more people flatting. Victor flats here. He's probably calling pretty wide. Queen 10 8 4 board here. I'd say, it's kind of like maybe hits everyone's range a little bit. Maybe
It's a
hits
very
Victor's.
complicated spot. Very, very dynamic flop texture, especially with these ranges, right? Like the big blind is going to have some tempting leads. The button can absolutely smash this flop with some of his high hands, but he can also more or less whiff it. So a complicated one.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And kind of like, interesting here, check, check, check. So I would say, like Victor here probably hasn't smashed it too hard unless he's got like, ace king jack nine with spades or something like that. Jared here probably has like some sort of mediocre holding too, and then George, when he decides to check back, I would also say is not really that strong here in position. So um just kind of like making relative reads at this point. And then turn here, Victor goes for a check. Jared does go for a bet.
Yeah,
George
so
calls. Go ahead.
one thing to point out, I think that's interesting is that George is the most capped of the three players here because if Jared's playing well, he can go for some check raises on this sort of flop texture that doesn't necessarily favor his opening range that much.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Victor's obviously going to have some strong hands that play both check and bet on flop end turns. So, it's really the only thing you wouldn't expect is George to have a good enough hand to put in more money on the turn here. He's going to be more in the passive mode, and that's what we're seeing. It does look very much like he's picked up some sort of a low combo hand here, just the way the hand's played out, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then I also think too, like Victor's hand here is still it's uncapped realistically. Victor can go for like two check raises. He could be relatively weak. He could still be like he could still have some sort of mediocre hand in this situation. But I think like if Victor has any sort of strong high hand, we'll say maybe like two high pair plus, he's probably going for a check raise here anyways. If he plays this route, I don't think he's going to check all here with like queen 10 or queen 8. I think he's probably going to go for the raise.
I think it would depend on his side cards a little bit. I mean, it's such a dynamic turn card that you know that there's just really no brick rivers for the most part. So my thinking here is to reopen the action. You definitely want to have some backup so that you can feel like
Yeah.
your hand can stay good on various river cards. So that might be two pair with like a high draw. So like any Broadway card can be good for him to improve to a straight, or maybe it's like one of the flush draws. So some of those cards are good for him. Obviously, if he has like a good low combo with it, that's even better. But that's a little less likely given the flat pre-flop.
Well, one of the reasons I actually you kind of took the words out of my mouth because one of the reasons here is when this river gets here, and we'll get there here. Let's get there. So Victor calls and it kind of like removes. Yeah,
Yeah.
so he calls and it removes again like some portion of his range of the situation here, and the river's a 10, 10 of hearts. So obviously the backdoor flush gets there, and the board pairs. So um, not too much here on this river here. What I think what's a little bit interesting is it does check to George, and George elects to check pretty quick here with three hearts in his hand.
That seems bad.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake too. That's one of the reasons I wanted to put this up here because the first thing is like kind of as the hands played out, it's really hard for someone to have a full house. Like no one bet the flop, and I think some players here are going to go ahead and Victor's a little bit uncapped, but I think like some of those combos that we were talking about with respect to two pairs, sets, etc. Like I think they are going to go for some check raises, so you can remove some of the combinatorics obviously out of Victor's range here, and then on this 10 river, like again, you kind of have to remove some of these like sets, two pair combos because no bet was put in on the flop and there was no check raise. Now, you were saying something earlier with respect to it kind of depends on the side cards. I think the combos that you might run into like a full house here, it's like if you're in the big blind, say you have like 10, 4, 3, 3, double suited or something like that. Like the river is not going to change anything. You have no flush draws, etc. I think that's a hand where you might want to consider check calling turn and then like evaluating on river, something
Definitely.
like that. But once this gets to you on the river, even though the board is paired and it goes check check, I mean these guys are going to go for thin bets with flushes. I mean like you have you blocking the third heart in here in this situation too. I think it's just I think it's a bet. I think this is
So
like just a bet.
So I have pretty strong opinion on this hand. I have not seen this hand before.
Mhm.
I have a pretty strong opinion that only one player played this hand even close to reasonably. Like I think Jared played the hand well, and the other two guys are just lighting it on fire in this hand. Um, One thing that is worth pointing out is when the high card comes in on the river here, you absolutely should see much more thin bets and calls because in Omaha 8 or better, the most high variance situation is when the low misses on the river. And now there's a lot of naked hands that have incentives to bluff. And obviously now the reward for winning the pot is you get to scoop the entire pot. So,
Correct.
you can feel very confident going for more thin value bets in the situation and know you can get called on the light side.
Hmm.
But if we look at the actual hands and we try to do a little bit of analysis of these three players' hands, let's look at it from each player's perspective. I say we start with Jared because his hand seems to me the most straightforward. He opened a very good starting hand. On the flop, he has kind of a marginal two-way hand. He has a backdoor low draw that's kind of worth whatever, and he has a pair. He doesn't have any good backdoor draws, and he decides to play a small pot. This all seems very good to me. I don't know how you feel about it, but I would definitely like checking his hand on the flop.
I'm same. Everything that you just said. Like he has no, even like you said, back he like his backdoor draws are kind of whatever, but his forward facing like immediate draws are not good. He has like no immediate way to win a pot if he's up against like any sort of value hand, right?
Now, on the turn, he ends up going for a value bet, which makes sense to me also. He's picked up a low draw that he feels pretty confident is the best low draw given the lack of action from anybody. He has a pair of tens, which is looking fairly decent, and there's so many draws out there that he can charge and get value from. And his hand doesn't suffer from the problem that we were talking about a second ago, which is like he knows what river cards are good for him, right? Like any low card is relatively good for him, and even a 3 is not so bad because he's going to have a bad low with 2 pairs, so it's a little bit hard to scoop his hand.
Yeah, and it's not going to make a straight either. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, he played the hand very well. Obviously, on the river, he made 3 tens, but he probably can't go for value when the hearts come in and he has 0 hearts in his hand. So I think his play is both good and relatively standard.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at George's hand here. Pre-flop is a pretty clear mistake, I think. This is a very overrated kind of hand combination. These like deuce 3 combos when there's already a raise in front of you.
I'm going to share a different one with you. This is one that I pulled up in Omaha, mate. So, and you can see over here basically like if Jared decides the raise cut off, which is this position right here.
Yeah.
Look at the 7-5-3 deuce. It only plays the double suited combos. That combo is winning pretty good. But if you can see over here too, the deuce 3-5-7 is still losing. And if you start to add that third heart in there, obviously it's going to be losing even more.
And this is just a really good pattern to be aware of when you're playing 08, which is that like these low hands function okay when you're opening, but they do not perform very well against reasonable raising hands that have you pretty dominated for the low side.
Yep.
Yeah, so going back to the hand, I think his pre-flop play is too loose. His turn call makes sense. I mean, he's played the hand fairly standardly on the flop in turn. What are you going to do? And then on the river, I think we both agree he can go for value here. Having the third heart in his hand definitely makes it better, I would say. And if he gets check raised, it's a difficult situation to deal with, and he just has to play poker. I mean, that's just kind of what happens when you play these weak hands. But I think for him, it was more of a pre-flop mistake.
Sure, but also you made a really good point earlier. I don't mean to interrupt with respect to the fact that the low missed, and when the low misses, you're just going to get a lot of these high variance spots.
I mean, that made a value out of those all low hands that we're talking about. Like he's going to have a number of airball kind of hands here that are, going to have 1 heart in them. Like maybe he has the naked ace of hearts here or something. He's going to have some tempting bluff combos for sure. I would also say that sneakily, I think Victor played the hand poorly. What do you think about folding the turn with his hand? I think his hand is much worse than it looks.
I think he's getting more than 6-1 to call here on the river. On the turn, and he's wrapped.
No, he's not. He's getting 5.5 to 1, right?
1, 2, 3,
5 and
4, 5. Sorry, you're right. 5.5 to 1. So probability wise, 6.5. He needs.
To me, the question is, what are his outs? He has literally 0 clean outs. Everything is tainted.
You're right. You are right. I think the thing is like. And this is where I think balancing some like really strong hands with some checks here. Like if Jared smashes this flop here, like say he's got ace, queen, deuce with nut spades, right? And decides to check this flop. That's where having something along those lines is really, really strong and makes you really tough to play against. Agreed. Because like as played, I think Victor doesn't think like, oh, I think a lot of my like a lot of times like I can catch a spade on a straight and win some. But I think generally, yeah, you make a good point because a lot of times, even when he makes the low straight, he loses half.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
this is a concept, and this is a concept a lot of people don't understand, right? It's like sometimes when you make your high hand, which you need to kind of scoop to justify your call in these situations, doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. Now, I think one of the things that might have thrown him off is like, well, I can see the last card closing the action for 1 bet. No one bet the flop here, so I might have some extra outs that I might not necessarily know. The other thing too is like, as much as I hate to, I'm not nitpicking this by any means, but he does have, if he does get counterfeit with some of the outs here, like sometimes he might, if he hits a 7 or 6, I mean, he still makes a straight. And, if he does hit the ace on this river here, like he still has an emergency low. He does have the worst low with 7-6, and it's not going to be good that often, but if it does go, bet call in front, he could probably fold that combo as well. So I think it's, go ahead.
I think everything you're saying is much more applicable to a heads-up situation where all of his, like, everything that improves him gives him some chance to win either all of the pot or half of the pot. Mm-hmm. The problem is that 3 ways, it's just a little unclear that he can ever win the low here.
Sure.
And then
Yeah.
all of his high outs are very tainted. So you have to reduce them by a significant amount, in terms of like if you're trying to do a pot odds calculation here. I mean, even his best card is probably the offsuit jack, and he still loses to 2 higher straights.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't know. I think it's sneaky pretty rough to continue here on the turn in a small pot.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think I would have probably just like mucked his hand because the other thing too is like players don't have to just bet, ace king ace jack. I think a lot of players here, if they don't have any pair on the flop with gut shot, especially on a queen 10 like 8 board,
For
I
sure.
think that's a little bit different than like queen 10 deuce because again, like if those low cards hit on the flop like the queen 10 deuce, queen 10 3, it's more likely your opponent is going to have like some sort of 2 pair combo on those boards because a lot of times like they have the deuces and threes in their hand.
Yeah,
So, like those Broadway combos for the most part, like your opponent here could just easily check ace jack, ace king back kind of thing.
I
Um
agree. Yeah.
so yeah, I think like yeah, probably in game I probably would have mucked it, but like, just kind of seeing it closing the action, like I kind of get why he does it, but yeah, I think you've definitely convinced me like this is probably a clearer fold than I would have thought in game. So
Yeah, just looking at this one hand, I just think that like you know, maybe O8 is not the game that some of these guys are, the most studied at.
well, I don't know. Victor finished fourth in this tournament this year. The 10K one. Yeah. All right, let's go to the last one here. Let's do a stud hand.
Great. Stud high, such a hard game. Especially amongst very high stakes players, because as you were mentioning earlier in the stud 8 hand, stud high has the kind of the most meta game I think going on, where there's a lot of hidden information and kind of less clear. I mean, like a lot of the way we're analyzing the Omaha hand is by looking up a tool like Omaha Mate or like thinking about solver strategy, but like there's not a lot of good like tools out there for studs, so a lot of people are playing a lot more intuitively, and it can be very difficult. It's difficult
Yeah,
for me.
and yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. All right, let's jump into it. All right, last hand here is the stud high hand with Victor, and this is versus George. So we're gonna see Victor bringing in here, and Jared's gonna fold the 6 of hearts, and Benjamin is gonna fold the 5 of hearts. So just a little bit of a um,
Preview here.
preview here. Yeah, George is gonna raise an 8. And Victor is going to 2-bet and call. All right. So again, like going back to like with respect to what the ranges look like, George is probably stealing here with the high card a very fair bit. And the fact that Victor decides to play back at him here is also telling as well. So again, like ranges are kind of like starting to narrow. So we'll get into it here. 4th Street, obviously George catches a very good card for his continuing range with the 9 of diamonds, and Victor kind of catches I would say like an okay card, but nothing great with the Jack of Hearts, obviously. So
One thing that might be worth pointing out is that because there was a dead 5 and only a 5 behind George, he will be stealing really wide on third here. And when you're in a stud situation where the ranges are really, really wide, people can be a little bit oversensitive to a scary looking board card. Like, yeah, I see the 9 of diamonds is connected to the 8 of diamonds here, but when your range is really wide,
Yep.
it's not like that automatically gives you a straight draw or a flush draw. You have a lot of like much weaker combos of like random 2 overcards and things like that as well.
yeah, I think kind of a good microcosm, but even though it does improve your hand a little bit, is like maybe even Raz. If you start looking at like 100% ranges and kind of look at like what the distribution of actual like really wide ranges do in situations like that, because obviously that's a scoop game too, but you can kind of like clarify some of these things down. I feel like when you're looking like at 100% range versus like a very tight range when someone like raises under the gun, like how much equity you have in these situations. But yeah, like in stud high, with respect to like a super wide range like George probably has, especially the continuing range against Victor's 2-bet here, it's still relatively wide. Like even though he does catch the 9 of diamonds,
Yeah. I mean,
Victor's
it's a good
whatever.
card for him, no doubt about it, but it's just not like that scary yet.
Yeah, and I would also say too, like I wouldn't be surprised to see Victor still bet here a decent
Agreed.
bit. Which is kind of interesting because he does elect to check
Okay,
here.
so he does check to like what looks like kind of the connected board,
Sure. Yeah.
and George chooses to bet. So now George is saying he has something, which he doesn't have to, but he is at least claiming.
Yep.
He's probably just basically thinking Victor has split 5s here a lot.
Yeah, I still think like Victor's range is relatively somewhat like wide with a re-steal, right? Like he can have some sort of like, 2 diamond hands. He could I would even say like sometimes here, against a very wide range, especially with the extra 5 here, like Victor might re-steal with like maybe some sort of like wheel draw with an ace in the hole, so where he's got like some sort of
Yeah.
over card. Like
That would be really spewy, but sure, I agree, it's possible. I think he's kind of representing a pair or a
yeah,
3
sure.
flush.
Yeah, sure. I think at this point, like he's just representing a pair of like 2 diamonds.
Yeah.
They tend to be like the most
Right.
obvious.
So he's bricked and George catches gin. I mean, relatively gin.
Yeah.
a board that's always betting now.
Sure. And this is another like important situation here, I think, too, if we go back to 4th Street, because a lot of Victor's range here on sorry, player froze. A lot of Victor's range here on 5th Street, like where he's got these like kind of mediocre hands, I would say for the most part here, just fold, right?
Yeah.
Like against facing open nines in this situation, when your opponent makes an open pair, a lot of times you're just giving up like easily some of your weakest combos. So it's not some of your like, I would say
Certainly.
middling combos too.
I
But
would think a difficult hand if I were in Victor's shoes here, a difficult hand to decide what to do with would be if I had a small pocket pair or split fives with a small kicker.
mm,
I think those would be hands I'd be tempted to fold. Whereas, because I'd only have the jack as an overcard to the nines, right?
mhm.
Whereas if I had split fives with a queen, I made it a 2-bet pot. I would feel pretty compelled to continue, I think.
Yeah, and like here in this situation, I mean, I guess you're continuing something like nines plus in the hole if you have buried pair. Something
Yeah,
along those
that makes sense. I think yeah, you want either the dominating pair or more overcards to improve, right? So that's where you need to have like the overcard kicker or the big pair. Whereas like a hand like threes feels like it has nowhere to go.
Sure. Now in this situation too, if like Victor has the like the gut shot plus backdoor diamond hand, I would take the like he's probably still continuing, given the
Oh,
price.
sure. Yeah, I think that's true. But there's just not too many ways to have that kind of a hand. He would have had to jam something like deuce 4-5 on 3rd Street
Well, if they're diamonds,
with diamonds. But there's only a few combos of that, I guess.
yeah, there's not so many combos, but I also think too like when you think about that too, like sometimes it also gives when you're looking at like range construction, it also like gives kind of the nice like bluff combos on later streets too.
Definitely,
So
yeah. And a good thought in stud is when you have a close decision, if you do have the backdoor flush draw, that usually might be like the tiebreaker that pushes you towards the more aggressive action, which here might just be a continue in a spot where you could consider a fold.
yeah, sure. All right, and again, like I think again with respect to that, like George bets here, and obviously Victor thinks for a second and then continues, and then
Yeah.
catches a four. And one thing I would say for the most part too, unless like Victor, really hasn't hit anything, like I think he's probably going to continue here into 7th Street. When George catches like an offsuit spade for the
Definitely,
most part,
yeah.
I think
And Victor catches a card that basically can either be neutral for him or good, right? With
yeah,
the two of diamonds.
yeah. So I think like he's going to continue here more often than not, if not ever.
Yeah, this seems like an automatic street. So really, George has an interesting decision on the river here. First off, right? Like he has to decide. It's always awkward in stud when you have a high pair on your board because, I mean, in a way, you're never really pure bluffing, right? I mean, you are bluffing if you bet. Sometimes if you have just nines, but the point is that like it feels like maybe you shouldn't because you have showdown value. But basically, if you're bluffing with nines here, you're sort of targeting Victor's like too little pair. You want to make him have a tough decision if he has fives and sixes, fives and deuces, sixes and deuces that he could have somehow made maybe, or maybe we're wrong and Victor does continue with small pair and then he's just going to make 2 pair on the river here with those small kickers like a little more often. If you're bluffing in George's spot, that those are the hands that you're sort of targeting. Um, I do think you get to bet a lot in George's spot. I do think that like Victor will have a number of small 2 pairs that are going to have a tough decision on the river here. He's also going to have a number of he's going to have those big 1-pair hands that are also going to have a tough decision, right? I mean, you mentioned earlier like him 3-betting nines plus or continuing nines plus. So anytime he has tens, queens, kings, aces in the hole, I think the hand will have played out the same way so far.
Yeah.
And clearly George is going to be able to put some pressure on those hands when he has just nines that have missed. So I think George can go ahead and bluff here sometimes with nines and then value bet all his 2 pairs.
Yeah, yeah. What I'm curious. One thing when you're thinking about like the bluffing here with like the open nines, obviously you want to do it at like some small frequency. Like, how do you usually, I would say, like find it? Are you like looking to find ways to like block 2 pairs on his board, kind of thing? Like those are your kickers, maybe in the hole, something along those lines, or
Well, I mean, in a way, you really just want to block the hands that are better than yours, right? Like you want to make small 2-pair have a tough decision. So ideally, you have a jack in the hole. I think would be quite nice for bluffing. I mean, you'd like to block the cards that are automatically going to call you. You know what I mean? If your opponent makes jacks up, you're never winning this pot. So I think you would prefer to unblock the small pairs that at least have a difficult decision when you have a bluff. Um, Ideally, you don't have diamonds in the hole because that makes Victor's range a little bit more weighted towards value hands instead of draws. That would be slightly bad for you, but it's not a big difference. But those would be some of the things I'd be thinking about. I would probably be thinking that I just get to bet often in George's spot here, though, because you do have all the strong hands. He also, we haven't really mentioned it yet, but he can randomly have 3 9s like quite easily here, I would say. I
Yeah,
mean, all of his stealing
absolutely.
hands that are just connected to the 8 will just spike the 9. And there's no reason to believe that he doesn't have any of those pre-flops. So he probably just has a huge like range and nut advantage here and just gets to bet this spot fairly often.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up here too, also in the basically I bring in poker tools here,
Ooh, look at
and
you doing your work.
I'm trying, man. But I gave this is George's exact hand here, so obviously we're gonna see this hand in a second. But he makes nines and fours on this river, and then I kind of constructed like Victor's range with what I think he continues on all streets. The one thing that I probably should add here is so I fixed the syntax over here, and basically, like I think these are the combos that Victor's continuing with. He's got basically aces through nines, excluding Jack Jack. If he had Jack Jack 5 5 6 6, I think we would have heard from him at this point somewhere along the lines.
Right.
Five with the overcard kicker here, and then some sort of like flush diamond diamond combo draw that he ended up having. Now Victor could also like raise some of those as pure bluffs, but I also think he's probably not getting George to fold that often. Plus George has two diamonds in his hand, so probably one he just wants to call with and then kind of see what happens is my guess. But if we run the situation here, like obviously nines and fours on this river against that range is doing relatively well. So like, yeah, the two pair here I think is a pretty clear bet, no doubt about it. But what happens in this situation is Victor now raises. And now this gets a little bit spicy here.
For sure, because obviously when you have naked nines, I mean, I guess in some ways, if you're bluffing with nines, you still have a slightly difficult decision if you get raised because you could still beat the part of the villain's range that, had a misdraw or just one small pair or whatever. But certainly, your two pair combos are facing a difficult decision immediately. Your opponent is value raising with, like, he could see your board, right? So I think that, like, Victor can kind of go for value here with basically any hand that can beat nines up.
Right, right. And
So Victor's representing that nines up is no good, and George has a decision to make of like how often does he need to pay off to stay indifferent against the one pairers and the misdraws and stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. There's two things interesting about this hand. The first one is I'm gonna skip just a little bit ahead here because George I skipped 30 seconds already, but George goes he asks how in this situation, like how did Victor raise in this spot? And as soon as I saw that, because I'm pretty sure like I was watching this as played live, and I thought to myself, is like his hand here is like three or four diamonds with like nines and fours because he's blocking both sides of the straight and has diamonds. And what's interesting is like that was the first thing I thought because I didn't know if Victor would go for like a thin raise here with two pair.
Yeah.
Like based on the fact that he's staring along nines, which I think is a good raise. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But like kind of looking at it, I thought he had something bigger looking at this board for the most part. He can also have
I
like
see what you're saying, or I see what George is saying. Like, if you block all the draw, then you don't expect your opponent to have made a straight or a flush on the river, which are the hands that would obviously value raise you, right? So,
right.
But I think that's a little bit lacking in experience, maybe for stud.
Yep.
I'm not saying it's a super fist pump raise with. Oh, so Victor ended up having jacks and tens here, so he probably had pocket tens most likely.
Yeah,
and then hits the jack on the end. That would make tons of sense. I mean, I think that's just a good play. He definitely is allowed to raise that kind of a hand, and you can see he got paid off by worse. So I think honestly, kind of a well played hand from both players. I don't think George did anything wrong.
No, I thought this was a very interesting hand. And the other thing I wanted to mention, just cleaning up the thought because it's a one with respect to value and the other respect to kind of what we've been talking about, and we'll kind of close it up here is obviously if George gets re-raised in this situation here by two pair, my initial thought to this question is, well, then George should be raising all trip nines. Like he should be three betting all trip nines in this situation too.
Yeah, and that's where it's going to come down to sometimes with your side cards in terms of like blocking the straight and flush cards would be good here. Like in this situation, I think George makes kind of a good payoff. I mean, not like it's you need to pay off here a lot anyway, but having a 5 in the hole seems particularly relevant here because one of the hands you'd be worried about is your opponent making 3 5s.
And I also wonder if that came into his decision as well when he's like, how? Like, this combo, but yeah. But
so
yeah.
I think it just seems like a well played hand from both players and definitely a high level stud hand. I mean, with this river raise is certainly not one that I would expect from a lot of my smaller and mid stakes opponents, but I think it's a good play.
Yeah, and I agree too. So for sure. And I also like wonder if I wonder how many like mid to low stakes stud players are actually like even raising trip nines on this river too, so which makes his raise probably a little bit better as well.
That's true. Like if you're never getting thin 3-bet, then you can feel even more comfortable going for a thin raise. Yeah, that's a generally good concept in poker is the less your opponent will ever punish you, the more you can go for thin value.
I agree.
But on the other hand, the less your opponent will punish you, maybe the less he's value betting Finn himself, right? That could be a concern.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of it's very interesting in some of these like metagame spots when you kind of like when you think about it, because obviously if you're like deviating from the whole GTO strategy, theoretically if you're playing against humans, you're going to be making more money playing better against your opponent, like
Yeah.
the way they play. But there's a lot of metagame, and especially in like these nosebleed games, there's just a ton of metagame going on. So
And
uh,
if I could give one piece of advice to like a learning viewer, I would just say you sometimes need to grit your teeth and raise in a spot where you will throw up if you get 3-bet.
yeah,
Like the thing is, it just doesn't happen as often as you think. When you're running bad, it happens all the time, and you're like, "Why did I do that? That was so dumb." But when you're playing your best and running normal and everything, like it's not like you're just snap getting 3-bet all that often. So if you're never going for thin river raises, then you're definitely playing way too scared.
yeah, 100%, 100%. So, anyways, hey, thanks for jumping on and talking about some of these hands.
Cool. I love it. I mean, yeah, seeing these nosebleed guys play mixed games is always fascinating and definitely makes me excited to play some poker.
All right, man. Well, good luck for the rest of the year, and I'm sure you'll be working hard and playing hard. And until then, everyone out there, good luck at the tables. Play well. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, Chris. Bye bye.